Hello, pod smashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
50-bit pod smash,
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer.
Hold on.
All right.
There we go. It's very awkward.
I had to take because I have a bottle opener in another room, and I opened it before I got here. So
Nice.
We are your hosts.
Penguin and Termite. I am Penguin.
I am Termite, and we are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games.
That's right. And tonight we are talking about the great indie game movement. And we'll just, in general, be talking about what indie games are and what their history was, and it'll be a blast. But until then, we are Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer. So, Termite, what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking straight out of Charlottesville, Virginia, a brewery called South Street Brewery, which they do distribute to our area. I'm also entering into the fall of time frame of the year, the season of the fall, because it's August and I don't really care. I saw it and I wanted it and I got it. And it's called the Twisted Gourd. It is an Imperial Chocolate Chai Pumpkin Ale. It's my first pumpkin ale of the year. I had one while we were there at the brewery, and it was awesome, so I brought a six-pack back for the purposes of this podcast, but last week I was traveling, so I also got Smart Mouth beer, and so here I am, finally circling back around to actually talking about it on the show. It is a Pilsner malt. It has Pilsner malt, mild ale malt, Munich 30-degree L malt, caramel. I mean, it has like chocolate malt, Columbus hops, lactose sugar. Ooh. Cacao nibs, chai spice blend, Scottish ale yeast. Yeah, I get all of those tastes and flavors out of this. It's kind of like amber colored, almost like it looks like a dark Oktoberfest. So it's really pretty to look at. And it has a little bit of pumpkin, but a whole lot of chocolate and chai.
Ooh, nice. Yes. That sounds great. I'm drinking
delicious.
From Center of the Universe, which is only a few exits south of me. I'm drinking their Oktoberfest. So their yearly
you got
Oktoberfest.
It too. What are the chances? We both decided to dive in on the Oktoberfest pumpkin thing.
Well, you got
so
to.
Early in the year.
You have to at I don't know about pumpkin and stuff like that, but for the Oktoberfest, especially the Sam Adams Oktoberfest, it comes out in August, and you have to grab it by the beginning of September, or else you won't get Oktoberfest that year. It flies off the shelves every year. I've ever noticed it, at least. So I actually have some Sam Adams Oktoberfest here as well, because I saw them and I was like, oh, we're grabbing those too.
Nice.
But yes, I also want to try the Cotus. And they have a little thing to read, so I'm going to read it real quick.
Yeah, do it.
It says, handcrafted in Virginia, our Oktoberfest blends old world ingredients and history with the new world techniques and precision in a seasonal toast to brewing tradition. Smooth, crisp, and ever so refreshing. It's a perfect complement to celebrating the coming of fall with friends, sausages, and knee-slapping papa music. Prost!
All right.
So, it's good. It's an Oktoberfest. I literally was able to do a direct comparison with the Sam Adams, and it tastes like it's got a little bit more of a robust flavor, a little bit crisper, but it tastes like an Oktoberfest. So it reminds me of fall. Delicious.
Yes. I'm actually drinking the Twisted Gourd beer, and as I'm drinking it, I'm thinking of Borderlands 3. For some reason, it's just bringing me right back to Borderlands 3, which came out in September 2019. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just I have that whole it's weird how sometimes certain tastes or smells bring back certain memories, but for some reason that's awesome. Yeah,
I was just saying that the sky the other day, that it was one of those deep blue skies with big puffy white clouds that normally you see in the summer, but sometimes you don't, because usually if it's humid enough, it's just a pale white. Anyways, but it was not pale white. It was a big bright blue with big puffy clouds, and I was some reason the sky and the way the light's hitting objects this time of year, I was it makes me think of two games. One is obviously World of Warcraft, because I played a lot of World of Warcraft in summer. Yeah. But the other one was for whatever reason, this is really vibing Final Fantasy VIII for me. I definitely played Final Fantasy VIII during the summer, and I was man, I want to play 8 real bad. So, anyways, cool. Well, is there anything you wanted to talk about aside from things that remind you of other things?
No,
olfactory senses.
We my wife and I toured Charlottesville area. We actually got this on our anniversary trip, which was kind of my favorite thing. We talked about it before at a vineyard called Barbersville. So we went into town and went there to South Street, and I'd seen their beers before, in the stores, and one of them is called Satan's Pony. That's a really popular one. For some reason, I did judge the bottle brewery by its cover, and didn't really give it that much time of day, so I'm guilty of that. Excuse me. And I should go back and explore more of their beers because this is really good.
Yeah, Satan's Pony, they distribute a beer, and I remember not loving that beer that they distribute. But I've been to enough breweries before to know that like the beer they distribute isn't always the best foot forward, right?
Right.
So
which is odd.
It's the one that they can. Yeah, you would think that, but it's the one that they can probably cheaply reproduce the best.
Yeah,
is probably what makes the most sense. You know, it's funny. Speaking of your anniversary, my wife and I woke up. You know, again, we are still in the throes of newborn baby and toddler wrangling, and this is my last week. This is my last week of parental leave. But we both wake up to a text message this morning from my sister, and it's a happy anniversary, and we were like, "Oh, that's today." So we both totally forgot our anniversaries. It's good that it's not just me. My wife forgot about it too, but we obviously made no plans. We can't. Like, there's nothing we can do.
Right. Yeah.
He's newborn, so it's fine. But it was just kind of funny. So you reminded me of that. That's my funny story for the day.
Fantastic.
Oh, shoot. There was something I feel like I wanted to talk about. I don't really have anything for you. So unless there's something that's been on your mind, we can talk about it, or we can move right on to our next segment. Literally.
I'm trying to think. I mean, in the gaming sphere, I guess we can do What Do You Learn if you want to do that.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we updated our audience on what we're doing.
I think we talked about it fairly recently, but we can talk about it again. It's fine.
Yeah. I actually made a social media post. I guess by the time this episode goes live, it will air. You can go back on our social media posts from weeks ago and see it. But Termite's Platinum game is lit. I have 3 new Platinums.
On fire recently, yeah.
Yeah, well, 4 total, but Ghost of Tsushima came out on PS5. I transferred the save and I popped the free Platinum, so I'm not going to talk about that because I didn't do that other than the work that I put in last year when I played it the first time. I just got a free Platinum. So what I actually played and had to Platinum through was a cool indie game, which we'll talk about a little tonight, called Tacoma, which was on PS4, and it's a story-driven game. I think it was published by Annapurna, if I do recall correctly. I would like to... No, developer is Fulbright, publisher Fulbright. I am wrong. They did Gone Home, so it's the same people that did that, which apparently is in the news for like a problematic workplace as well, and that was kind of sad to hear after I got the Platinum on this game, after I sent money. But it takes place in space, and you are visiting a space station where a catastrophe has happened and people have died, and you are recounting the events as like an investigator would to piece together the story that happened. Fantastic game. I highly recommend it. I also platinumed Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which made by Ninja Theory, which is now a Microsoft Studio game, but they came out with the PlayStation version years ago. You played this. You got the platinum for it as well. It's a game that kind of explores what psychosis can do to an individual in the setting of like Nordic mythology. And so you hear all the same things we're hearing from like the Marvel Cinematic Universe with Thor, Loki, and God of War. They all explore those kind of Nordic gods as well. And so it takes place following Senua and her drive to bring her lover's head back to hell in order to reclaim his soul. And so it's pretty deep, pretty scary. Not super scary, but pretty scary. And then my last...
It's more disturbing, unnerving. It's more like psychologically... Like, it's not like a jump scare game. It's more like it's just kind of... It's sad, but it's also like disturbing, right? Like, and it's meant to give you a sense as to what it's like to live with this particular affliction. And does a really, really effective and thorough job of that. So
yeah, the scenes where like you're racing through the dark and you have to go from light to light. And it really, really builds tension.
Oh, and there's like shadow beat. You never get a good look at them. Yep. They do so good with that kind of horror because like you never see what exactly it is.
Yep.
It's not like a big scary monster with tentacles and blood dripping from its mouth like charges you. Nope, it's just this vaguely shadowy shape that you get a sense is bigger than you're actually able to see. That's so good.
Yep.
So amazing. Yeah.
It's really, really good. I highly recommend anyone who has a chance to go play it, whether it's on Game Pass, so go check it out there. In fact, they just had Xbox Series X enhancements added to it, so it's now 4K and it looks gorgeous. I kind of want to fire it up just to see the difference because PlayStation 5 isn't getting support anymore because they're not they're Microsoft Studio now.
Yep.
And the third platinum I picked up was on my Vita, a game called Severed, which is also on the Nintendo Switch as well. A touch-based combat game that has combat like Fruit Ninja, where you swipe across the screen in certain ways to attack enemies. It's got to be an indie game as well, because it's like a dungeon crawler, but the dungeons it's developed by Drinkbox Studios. It's a role, and it's definitely an RPG, a hack and slash beat 'em up, and the map is very grid based, kind of like Metroid would be, the original like Metroids, where you go up, right, left, but you can't look in the direction of up or down. You can only go. It's a single plane, so you can look around you within each room, but it's a very linear based game. Yet it is sprawling, so that's there. And there's puzzles that are kind of fun and unique that make you go around certain areas a couple of different times and kind of analyze the rooms. And then all the enemies, sometimes you fight one, sometimes you fight 4, 10, all at one time. And all the enemies have their own kind of ATB bar where they're going to attack you, and you have to turn and face them and counter their attacks to defend yourself. It can get very stressful and very hectic. A couple of times I wanted to throw the Vita through the room was when, towards the end, there's a massive, massive difficulty spike that was extremely frustrating because it had nothing. Like, the game was normal. It was fine. I wouldn't say easy, but it wasn't hard. And then it was just, like, impossible fights. I had to, like, go online and figure out ways to get around these fights and how to do it right, find other people's strategies and follow them. And it was okay. So there's some skill trees and upgrades and things. I definitely would also recommend this one. So it's a good game. It was cool. So there you go.
Wow,
those are my
I don't
three.
have a Vita. I can't do it. Whoa.
You have a Switch. You get on that.
I am. My platinum game has slowed to a crawl for obvious reasons. I did get Dark Souls, and that was only due to the fact that my family was here to help out for a week, and so I was able to play a lot of that. So I got that platinum and was happy with it. But since then, I wanted to palate cleanse before I picked up one of the other 2 Dark Souls games that I bought in that batch. So I am palate cleansing with Astral Chain right now. So won't be getting a platinum from that anytime soon, but I'm enjoying it a lot. In addition to that, I am playing Outriders and working through that with my buddy Justin whenever we have time to play together. So that will eventually be a platinum, but probably, because eventually I'll probably just work on it to try to get the platinum from it. It's not a terribly hard platinum, just time consuming and grindy. And then, yeah, that's it. That's all I'm working on. I did get snag a copy of Mass Effect Legendary Collection, and I snagged a copy of, or like I said, I have copies of Dark Souls 2 and 3, which I will be playing at some point before Elden Ring comes out, preferably.
Yeah.
And yep, that's it. That's all that's waiting in the wings for me. So that's all I'm playing right now, because I literally don't have time for anything else when I do have time for those things. So
non-platinum type games, I forgot to mention, I'm playing Skyward Sword.
Oh yeah,
HD, which is awesome. I love going back to that world, and I understand all the critiques that are out there, and I agree with them. The controls aren't the best, and it was a difficult Zelda to get into, but it does capture magic. It's gorgeous. It has a magic that captures you as a player. It has the amazing score, like the sounds, the music, everything else. I love the environment. I love Skyward Sword a lot more than a lot of people do. Not discrediting the critiques, because like I said, I get it. But I love Skyward Sword, and I love revisiting Hyrule, the sky. It's pretty sweet.
Cool. Awesome.
That, and I'm still kind of working on new Pokemon Snap, a little bit on the side. So here and there, working my way through it. And I have not forgotten about Persona 5. I'm not done with it yet. It's been a long break.
Good.
But I've been jonesing to get back to Tokyo.
So good. All right. Cool. Well, those games are the games we're playing, and many of them are our favorite things, but
doing this podcast is our favorite thing. Favorite things. Yeah,
it's a segment of our show where we share with you the thing we are excited about, whether it's something we have discovered for the first time, or that we have rediscovered, or that it could be books, music, food, entertainment, or it could just be a moment. But we're hoping that it will inspire you to go out and find your next favorite thing. So my favorite thing is, my buddy Justin visited to see the baby this weekend, and he came out and hung out, and we mostly just hung out and talked. Obviously, there's only so much you can do when you've got a toddler and a newborn, but it was a good time with him. But when the babies did go to bed, we decided to drink alcohol and watch Red versus Blue. So there's my kind of like takeaway.
Yes.
Favorite thing is we rediscovered our love for this old web series. Like, it's funny how like ridiculously old Red vs. Blue is, but it came out back in like 2002 or 3, I think. It was between Halos 1 and 2, obviously. Very early internet. Like, I mean, I don't even know if YouTube had really like become even a thing yet at that point. So you had to like go to their website to download their videos. Or I don't even think you could stream them. I think you had to download each individual episode. Ridiculously old. And so like the references too are like really old. Like when they do get like kind of political, they're talking about like the WMD situation in Iraq. I mean, it's just like, whoa,
oh wow, yeah,
man, we're so far removed from that. Obviously, you know, there are certain aspects of it that haven't aged well too. It's a little bit homophobic. Sometimes in humorous ways, but sometimes in ways that are like, oh, come on, guys. But again, 2001, 2002, that doesn't surprise me too much.
Right.
But nevertheless, it's still, it holds up. Like, it's a solid, like, web series and with solid comedic writing and performances. And that still hold up today. And maybe it's just nostalgia, but I still find it very amusing. And like, you know, 20 years later, I'm like watching it and picking up on things. And I'm like, oh, I was way too young to understand that reference. So that would be it. I would check. I mean, literally, they have all of them on YouTube now. Of course, you can go. I think they at one point had them on Netflix too. But you can literally just like watch the first season all in one go, or watch all the seasons in one go. But I've only seen up to like season 4 or 5. I think when they started like Halo 3 using Halo 3 engine is probably around when I stopped.
Oh, they went all the way through Halo 3?
Dude, they've gone all the way through like Halo Guardians, I think. Like, I think have like the most, they still have like 20 seasons of the show basically, and they have everything up through Halo 5. It's insane.
Huh.
So I stopped a long time before that.
Yeah.
But I definitely would recommend checking out Red vs. Blue if you've never heard of it. Just literally type Red vs. Blue and go watch hilarious Halo videos.
I watched some of it back in 2020.
Oh, yeah.
2002.
Yeah, I remember being like a senior in high school and watching it, like blowing off my programming class with one of my friends in that class just to watch Red vs. Blue, because I hated programming and was bad at it. So I was like, whatever, I'm gonna do like whatever I need to, and then just watch Red vs. Blue.
That explains a lot. That's information.
Yeah, that is. Hold peek behind the man behind the curtain.
Nice. My favorite thing is a extraordinarily clean refrigerator.
Oh, nice.
Yes. Our groceries were super, like, we ran out of everything. And I was like, this is a great opportunity to gut the refrigerator and pull out all the shelves and wash them. And it happened while I was at work. My wife did it all. And I came home and I saw it. I was actually excited to come home. Like, driving home, I knew that she had done it. And I was like, I can't wait to go see this fridge. It was the first thing I did. Hi, kids. Below, right past them. What was for dinner? I don't care. Refrigerator open. Clean. Yes. And I just looked at it and I was like, a clean refrigerator. It was amazing. It's awesome. So nice. I love it. Yep. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah. I'm not a clean freak. I tend to be a little bit more comfortable in organized chaos. But
is that what you call it?
Yes, that's what I call it. But but there's a difference between something being cluttered and something being dirty. And when you have something that's dirty for a long time and it's suddenly clean, I still can totally identify with that satisfaction of being like, oh my gosh, finally, this looks good. I don't feel like I'm gonna get germs just by touching it. So yep, can totally identify. I mean, I can identify with it because literally it happened at my house the other week when my family came and just cleaned everything. I'm like, oh yay, things are clean now. This is great.
Yeah, we went on a rampage and power washed our house too, and now I'm awaiting some references for who can stain my deck.
Yes, nice. All right,
so
cool.
I understand.
Well, that's favorite things, which leads us to our final segment. DLC stands for downloadable content. It is a segment of our show where we have a little fun mini discussion, mini game, so to speak, about video games, something that you wouldn't normally have about video games, conversation that is. So we're going to do our classic blank again. Because it is, number one, it's low effort, and number two, we don't really pull from the indie game pool. So that's my limitation here is we're going to pick characters from indie games. And I'm actually going to pick the characters this time. So all I need from you is a, what do you call it?
I don't know.
Contest, competition of some kind. That's it. Sorry, brain stops working.
Okay.
So that's how this works. So it was, again, if you are new to the show, or if you're a long time listener that just hasn't happened to hear one of these ever, blank blank is inspired by the old who would win in a fight, blank versus blank. Or in this case, it's going to be who would win in any competition, blank or blank. So I'll pick the characters. He's going to pick the competition. We have no idea who picked what ahead of time. So go for it.
Okay. The competition is who can get through the island on the Witness the fastest.
The island on the Witness the fastest.
So the Witness is a puzzle video game developed and published by Thekla, inspired by Myst. The games involve the exploration of an open-world island filled with natural and man-made structures. The player progresses by solving puzzles which are based on interaction with grids presented on panels around the island or paths hidden within the environment. No direction instructions are given on how these puzzles are to be solved, requiring the player, or in this case our character, to identify the meaning of symbols in the puzzles. A central design element to the game was how these puzzles are presented so that the player can achieve a moment of inspiration through trial and error and gain that comprehension themselves. I use this as a perfect example of it. It is an indie game, and it's a puzzle game, and it's very hard.
It's an indie game within an indie game. Yeah. All right, cool. That's fine. My characters that I picked were going to be pretty hilarious because it was Shovel Knight and Cuphead.
Oh, all right. Yep, those are indie games.
Yep. So, who would win in? Is it actually being in? Like, are they in the Witness? Like, are they the characters of the Witness?
Yep,
they're in the game, so they're not playing the game.
Correct.
Okay,
they
Shovel
are
Knight,
living the game.
Shovel Knight, because he just dig under all the puzzles.
Does Shovel Knight actually dig?
I think so.
I don't know. I don't think he does. I thought he just like jumped on top of people,
like whack things with a shovel.
Yeah, and like
that's entirely
downward
possible.
Strike. I don't think he actually digs.
That would be disappointing.
There's some digging areas. I'm looking at it now.
Dig under it. Just dig under all the puzzles.
I guess he could. And yeah, Cuphead. Is Cuphead smart?
All right, Cuphead just strikes me as like a character that has like gumption. You know, if he were to touch the Triforce, I think he'd get courage, but definitely not wisdom and power. He's more of a like, I'm gonna save the day, and goes in there, guns blaze, fingers blazing in his case. So figuring out puzzles and all that stuff are not necessarily his strong point. That said, the same could be true for Shovel Knight, I imagine, but he can at least dig under things. So that's why I'll give him the edge.
Well, Cuphead can shoot magic bullets from their fingers.
He can, yeah.
So maybe he can shoot some of the things and like break the puzzles. And apparently Cuphead is knowledgeable about demons due to working and living with them for years.
Oh, okay.
And he's a skilled lock picker, has been shown to carry lock picking tools around everywhere he goes. There's a lot of information on the internet about Cuphead.
Right.
And he has considerable combat experience from working for the devil for years, and he's very physically capable. Extensive knowledge and experience in the criminal underworld, meaning they have a wide range of contacts throughout multiple cities. When interacting with these criminal contacts.
And it's like a lot in the pros columns.
Yeah.
And then it all gets superseded by the shovel.
Yeah, right? Just dig under it all. Which, in the game, you can't really dig, but he's on the island the game is in, so he can make it happen. Yeah. It's his world now.
I guess so.
Cuphead is often described as a hothead. He gets angry easily and often picks fights with other people, so that's a huge con in solving puzzles. He is not going to have the patience to deal with that.
For sure. And, he probably, like, shoot the puzzle and, in an effort to break it.
Permanently broken, yeah.
And then the giant cartoon evil flower would pop out of it and attack him, and, how that would go. So... All right, cool. Well,
I think Shovel Knight's got this one.
I think so too, but we want to hear what the listeners think. Do you think that Shovel Knight or Cuphead would win in beating the Witness? Were they thrust into those worlds? Who would solve the puzzles the fastest? We want to hear your thoughts, and Termite will share where you can share your thoughts if you have them on DLC.
You can find us at 80bitpodsmash.com, 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website, where we have links to all of our podcast platforms of your choice: Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, etc. Our RSS feed is there. You can throw it into any third-party app for your listening pleasure. If we don't exist somewhere you would like us to be, let us know, and we'll put ourselves there just for you. You can also find links to all of our social media outlets: Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, and Twitter. We have a Discord server as well, which the link is in most of our show notes. as well as our presence on twitch.tv/80bitpodsmash, where we go live every Monday for a news show of the week, running through the week's news, and Wednesday for a gameplay live stream. Lots of places. We are all over the internet. So if there's somewhere and you want us to be and we're not, we will find a way. I guess we're not on TikTok. That's like the only thing left, right?
Yeah, no, we're not on TikTok.
We're not on TikTok yet.
I don't necessarily have any intention to be, but I suppose we have to go where the people are, right?
That's right. indiepocalypse.com. So check us out. Give us a click, a like, share, and follow. Comment on something on social media. Jump into a chat on Discord. Follow us on a live stream and interact with our community. We would love to have you. We want to grow our community. We want more voices, and we want more interactions from all of y'all lovely people. So hit us up.
All y'all. Awesome. Cool. We're going to jump right in talking about indie games and the independent game movement.
Ooh.
So, or I guess if it can be called a movement, I guess it can be. It's not like an organized thing, but we'll get into it. Yep. So let's start with definitions, though. What is an indie game? What do we mean by indie game? What is an indie game? And how has this blurred over time?
Once again, Wikipedia is our friend. And yes, we know that you all can go look it up as well, but we're going to actually talk about it after we read the basic definitions. So please stick with us as we read Wikipedia's definition. An independent video game or indie game is a video game typically created by individuals or smaller development teams without the financial and technical support of a large game publisher. In contrast, most AAA games are, supported by a large game publisher. However, the indie term may apply to other scenarios where the development of a game has some measure of independence from a publisher, even if a publisher helps fund and distribute a game, such as creative freedom. And I want to highlight that sentence. Hazel Light Studios that made A Way Out and It Takes Two is a perfect example. They were funded by EA, but they had all the creative freedom in the world, and they don't plaster EA all over them. Microsoft also has ID at Xbox, and that's an initiative where Microsoft funds studios to make independent titles because they have complete creative freedom. Those are also independent titles.
It's good that both the Wikipedia article and we are taking time to highlight that, because that's kind of one of the biggest things that sort of changed, and we'll get to that as we talk about the history. But now indie games, and a lot of times indie games are funded by big publishers, and but they still operate with a lot of that independent freedom. But because Microsoft, EA, there's a lot of these big publishers that have programs to help foster indie creativity.
Right.
But it does blur those lines a little bit in regards to what is indie and what isn't.
And then there's also funding themselves through crowdfunding campaigns like Kickstarter. That's how you can also get funded by. Are you really in an independent studio if you're getting all of your money from Kickstarter and you make a bunch of promises and you kind of have? That's also debatable. I would say you're entirely independent if you have creative freedom. So. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, yeah, and that's what's hard to nail down. It's it was one of those things where it used to be really clear. It was anyone making games not with a publisher is an independent studio. But at the time, almost all of those guys were, small teams with limited budgets, and now that's changed. Now there's independent studios that are bigger than a lot of AAA studios that still work and operate independently, but are making again, we brought up Senua's Sacrifice, and it's one of those interesting blurred lines of Ninja Theory was making that without a development studio, but it's AAA quality, quote unquote AAA quality, but it was made independently. It's okay, this is this is no longer quite so clear. But the general things that we're looking for here, like you said, are full creative freedom, and oftentimes with smaller development teams with lower budgets. That's the vast majority of indie games out there. So cool. Then what is the independent video game movement? That's just, we'll kind of talk about where this sort of fits in the history, but there's a certain point in the early 2000s and kind of throughout the mid 2000s where there was a bigger push from amateur developers or, even people kind of ex-veterans of the industry to break away from the model of having a huge publisher. And they're enabled to do that through digital distribution, which we'll get to as well. So, yep, cool, awesome. Anything else you wanted to hit?
About the definition of an independent title. Sometimes indie studios will grow after a successful hit, and a studio will become a publisher, kind of like Annapurna, where they incubate, if you will, other independent studios. And as a publisher of an independent publisher is funding independent development studios. And so Annapurna is an example of that, where all the artistic freedom is still in the hands of the developers, but the publisher that's funding them also created independent titles. So it can get a little murky and a little messy about the whole idea of being independent and whatnot. But
yeah, exactly.
That is another unique situation to the indie movement, if you will.
Cool. Awesome.
Yep.
All right, so let's talk about the history. How did this thing kind of happen, and what is kind of, what's kind of the history of indie games and the movement? So again, this is kind of hard to it is hard to kind of pin down the exact origin, because there's a pretty good argument to be made that a lot of game studios, especially in the early 60s and 70s, all of them were independent studios, right? Because they were just guys making games and pushing them out. It wasn't really till the 80s where the big, or I guess late 70s and early 80s, where the big money started coming in and, forming these publishing companies and using that model for distribution. We've talked a lot about what the kind of, the so-called AAA, publishing model looks like in video games. Yep. So we don't need to spend too much time, but that kind of really started to solidify later. But, even as early as the 70s, there's, the sort of, basic and bedroom coders, guys, basically just pushing out games such as 1963 Space War. They weren't commercially financed, they're just made by a small team. And yeah, there's also and a lot of these were distributed, since they didn't have publishers to distribute them, they would mail order. you could message the guys or mail them and be like, hey, I'd like a copy of the game. And they'd burn it to a floppy disk, I guess, and mail it to you. So that's kind of the really early origins. It was during this time that kind of indie games started to be sort of an experimental space, because again, there wasn't a lot of investment on the line, so they could kind of just have that sort of art house appeal. So and they cite the example of a bedroom coded game in the UK called Manic Miner from 1983 that had a lot of quirky British humor and experimental gameplay aspects.
Yeah, it's consoles had approachability to program. There was a flood in the early 80s to things like the ZX81 and the VIC20 and Acorn Atoms. These are all platforms that any person could go and start programming for. And so there was this mad flood of titles, and it actually kind of contributed to the crash of the video game industry that we've talked about before in 1983, where there was just so many video games that retailers couldn't sell them, and they were taking up space, and so the retailers kind of shut it down, and there's this massive collapse where Atari games were worthless, games were sold for a penny, and it was just liquidation, and retailers were we're done, we're not going to stock them anymore. This is Toys R Us or whatever, Circuit City or whatever was at the time, and that needed to happen so that Nintendo could stand in, and the whole idea of we're going to sell them as toys, and we're going to market them differently and have this seal of quality, and we're going to put all these tight reins on. If you want to publish something on NES, you have to buy the cartridges from Nintendo, and the iron grip of what that was to kind of revive the gaming industry. Well, after that, we still had PCs, of course, and then in the early 80s, there was this shift of, instead of these little console-like PCs, it was now shareware. As PCs became more standardized, shareware came up, where the new model of, we'll give you the big giant chunk of a game for free, and then if you like it, then you can continue to buy the add-on content, which is funny because that's the grandfather of DLC.
Kind of. My understanding of the shareware as it was at this period of time was more you got kind of a demo of the game. Exactly. Just a small, it was more of a smaller chunk, maybe the first level or so, and if you liked it, then you could upgrade to the full version. And that's actually how Doom. So it's software. So it wasn't just independent developers that were doing this at the time. Even some of the bigger, I guess bigger id Software at the time was 5 dudes.
Right.
So
I think they were an independent studio at the time.
Were they independent at the time? Yeah, I guess they were. Yeah. So but Epic Games and Apogee, they all did shareware at the time for some of their games. And yeah, it's more here, buy, or it's here, you can get a demo. They'd send you a floppy disk, and if you liked it, they'd send the full version of it. So crazy.
Yeah, and then that continued to evolve, and we're kind of glossing over that era of history, but then Steam happened, when
right. So
Gabe
here's
Newell-
where the movement really kicked. The history of the actual so-called independent video game movement kicked off. Is suddenly digital distribution was available. Actually, even before Steam became a thing, things like Flash, Adobe Flash, allowing you to make games for browsers pretty easily and stuff like that. Like I remember playing Flash games all the time.
Newgrounds.
Exactly, online and stuff like that. So yeah, the digital distribution kind of kicked off in the beginning of the 2000s as the internet became more and more ubiquitous, broadband became more accessible and affordable, and more and more people were getting online. Digital distribution of games is becoming more of a reality, and that's when the movement began in earnest. As opposed to just dudes messing around in the basement. If the ones that were really popular, they'd end up getting bought and become part of the publisher developer model. Now it was like, nope, you were one guy, you had an idea for a game and half of programming ability, like you could publish this now on Steam. So I didn't want to cut you off there though. So what?
Oh yeah, but at the same time, like retailers were now starting to only allow the premium content in, and that was creating the space where big publishers like EA and Activision were being formed, and like Nintendo and Sega, and some of the bigger name titles were only what you would see in stores for like the big consoles. But that drove the indie market down. That like put a huge damper on it. So that's why we kind of skipped over that when we were talking about shareware and like demo discs and like PC magazines shipping demo discs in it, and how Doom came out to be, et cetera, because that's the only thing left for garage and bedroom coders to come up with their content. But what's happened with Steam here in like 2002 and Half-Life was people started resorting to, let's just mod the bigger games to get exposure. And so there was a lot of mods, and like Counter-Strike came out as a result, which was a mod of Half-Life. And then Steam came out and started the whole allowing us a digital storefront and digital distribution and kind of revolutionizing that on the PC side. And it was the first successful attempt at creating a digital distribution service that can be like curated to a user's needs. Games can be downloaded onto any computer forever, so no longer needing to print discs and ship boxes and take up store space or shelf space at a retailer. And so there was a whole bunch of a flood again to take the shareware that we've already been doing. Instead of sending demo discs, now we can just kind of host it through Steam. And at the same time, as Steam was ramping up, the biggest thing happened in the console space. That was the Xbox Live Arcade. So in 2005, the Xbox 360 launched, and they announced the Live Arcade, and now we can get digitally distributed games on home consoles, which was unprecedented ever. Like this has never happened before. Yes, Dreamcast dabbled online. Yes, the GameCube had a modem. Even the Super Nintendo had a modem, but no one was distributing content at this level where you could exchange credits for games on your console hooked up to your TV in your living room until Xbox Live Arcade did it. And that like just kindle like wildfire. Independent games were coming out of the woodworks to be published on Microsoft. I mean, the 360 was selling gangbusters. What a great way to be exposed and like cast a wide net on getting your studio out there and selling copies of games. In fact, I started to take notice of the entire indie game movement because of Xbox Live Arcade. I know I'm not the only one, but if you think about like Minecraft was an independent game for a long time. It was an indie game, and it came out by way of just being released on PC. And Microsoft, they grew so good and so successful that Microsoft acquired them. But that wasn't through Xbox Live Arcade yet. Some of the early popular games that came out on Xbox Live Arcade were like Braid and Limbo and Super Meat Boy and Castle Crashers and all of those like early indie games that set the stage and the foundation for what would be like many, many years to come, even today, to like all of the awesome indie games that we have now. The quality's only gotten better. People can appeal to like the 8-bit way and like do their own thing with creative freedom. So you have games like Moonlight, and you have The Messenger, and you have Shovel Knight, as we talked about, and even Cuphead and The Witness.
Yeah, I mean, simultaneously, so during this era, like, we kind of covered a lot of ground there. But during this era, as indie games were starting to rise in popularity, you saw Epic Games, began to like license out Unreal Engine for like super cheap for indie developers to allow them to have their tools to make games with. Same with Unity.
Yep, Unity came out.
And there was software like Game Maker Studio, all you began to see game engines. We had a whole episode on game engines. And so, as the indie game movement began to rise, you saw that these engine makers, engine developers were investing in indie developers by providing them those tools for cheap. And in a lot of ways, it was seen as like, oh, we don't have to just now market to the same like 5 publishers, right? Like we can now market to the average Joe and sell it at a much lower cost, but then begin to get sort of a quantity of sales action. Mm-hmm. But in general, just again, in some cases they would provide it pro bono and just to kind of again help along, provide more tools for these developers to do their thing.
And why I say creative freedom, you've said it too, and some people might just gloss over that as like a buzzword, but where this actually matters, and it goes back to what I was talking about with the retailers and the big publishers, they were chasing after the big popular dollars. And that's where if a game sells well, let's copy it. Grand Theft Auto does really, really well. So open world is now the new thing. So now you have games like Fallout and you have Skyrim, followed up by The Witcher, followed up by Horizon Zero Dawn. Like everything's open world, Red Dead Redemption. And yes, those are like limited to a certain amount of publishers, but that's kind of the model that was even set up back in the early 2000s, where if you walk into a Walmart or a Toys R Us or Best Buy, you're going to find the titles that are, quote, popular and the things that people want. The creative freedom allows experiences like Gone Home or Everybody's Gone to the Rapture or What Happened to Edith Finch. I can't remember the name of the game.
What Remains? You got it. What Remains of Edith Finch?
What Remains of Edith Finch, yeah. And then games like Cuphead, where you can take creative risks. You can now break away from, we're not going to make this game that's popular because this publisher won't give me money unless they think it sells. And I can now make the game that I want to make and tell the story I want to, be it controversial, be it something strange or really out there. And it gives that creative freedom a space to like flourish and reach an audience. And yes, those things usually cost less dollars. And so you can find publishing through the many ways that we talked about at the beginning of the show, where the independent studios are publishing, or like EA has a way to do that. Microsoft's got a way to do this. Sony's got its way. Shuhei Yoshida right now is the head of the whole entire indie arm for PlayStation 5. And there's a lot of games coming out of that are funded by Sony. And so we're seeing a lot of really awesome like storytelling experiences that are fleshing out creative minds in the gaming industry so that we don't get nothing but Call of Duty every year and Madden,
right?
Because that's what sells.
Yeah. So we'll get more into the pros and cons as we go. I wanted to highlight just a few more technologies that historically had a huge impact on the indie game movement. Kickstarter was a big one, for better or for worse. Now suddenly you had a means of securing funds beyond just hoping your game sold well, and losing a bunch of money up front or getting taking out a loan or something, or by going to a publisher or going to another publisher or something like that. Now you could just secure it through crowdfunding. So again, for better or for worse, there's a lot of controversy with that over the years for both video games and board games, that a lot of which got funded through Kickstarter independently. But that was a big one. And then things like mobile phones, then suddenly, once they were able to get games on storefronts such as Google Play and the Apple Store, that was another big, huge driver of indie games. So with this exploding popularity, we suddenly reached the mid 2010s, and in 2015 a lot of industry insiders began to worry of what they termed the indie apocalypse. Yep. Which was this sort of fear that there was going to be too many indie games. I'm looking at a chart right now that just shows there's just a huge amount of like indie games explode onto the scene, starting in 2014 and going all the way up to 2020, just like insane amount of games. But the numbers actually show that indie games are still doing well. And still selling well. It doesn't look like the bubble is going to pop anytime soon. So there does seem to still be space for it. So the indie apocalypse, they were started worrying about it in 2015. We're now 5 years into that, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down, that market. So that is that. So cool. That's the history. Let's talk about my next question, which is, pros and cons. So we kind of hit on some of those already, but what's the pros and cons of the independent game movement? What's the pros and cons of indie games? And just kind of like a side note there, do you like indie games? Do you tend to like them?
Actually, do I like them? Is a great question, because that's a progression. It's not just a yes or no.
Yeah.
But pros and cons first, like we mentioned, the creative freedom, being able to tell your own story, super low risk. And if you can do the funding through like EA or any of those big publishers that are funding, it's awesome because you get a huge injection of cash. You can do your thing, and to them, it's low risk. It's probably a tax write-off, and for you, it's a chance to like make a name for yourself in the game industry and publish a cool story and make something neat that people would experience. Cons that we haven't talked about yet already are, well, there's an oversaturation of low quality product because when you see a platform like Steam, so much garbage. And the appeal here is, think about like how many people play Steam, millions and millions and millions of potential. So if you can just sell, like, if there's over 100 million potential clients, you can sell a 1% of them. That's 10 million or a million. Sorry. So like, that's a million people to buy your $2 game. You've made $2 million, but it costs you what, 50 grand to make. So that's kind of the appeal. It's like this race to the bottom. Let's create this super cheap. And a con also was like the App Store and Google Play on the mobile side, where there was this race to the bottom with free to play and microtransactions, and like all it was casting a super wide net and trying to get everyone. If you can get 1 million people to give you 10 cents a piece, like, yes, I've made what, $100,000. It's that whole like super cheap, low barrier of entry storefronts, and this oversaturation creates a curation issue. The PlayStation Store, the Switch Store, the Steam Store, the Microsoft Store, they are inundated with crap tons of video games. Yes, there is 11,000 games like on this 2020 stream picture you just mentioned, where like on Steam there's 11,000 different games. So curation is now the issue. It's like, what do you want to play and how to find it? If you're a developer, how do you get your game to be shown off? Like, how do you get people to actually see it?
For sure. And Steam ran into that problem too, where they were their green light program was kind of like, again, it was so open that it was like, all right, anything goes, right? And then they encountered their first circumstance where they decided if they had to ban a game or not, right? Because there was the game that came out that was like where you were like shooting up a school, or something like that. And and it was one of those things where it's like, okay, yeah, suddenly there's this sort of the pros and cons are both like, it goes hand in hand with this idea that like, independent game development by its very nature is now anyone can publish a game. Now anyone can get their creative vision out there. The problem is some people have awful vision.
Or they just want to make money.
Right, yes, exactly. Right. Both and or, but the result ends up being terrible product. Like you either have, you have the worst of the internet makes a game that is terrible, that is awful. I mean, morally, spiritually terrible game. It can get out there now because of the independent game movement. And so again, you have to consider these storefronts now have to weigh, well, are we going to be a open source platform where anything does go, like, or do we have to censor? Do we have to decide that it's right to censor in some cases? And how do we create guidelines for that? Totally up to each individual storefront to determine that for themselves, but it's definitely one of those questions of like, okay, how much freedom is good and how much freedom is dangerous or detrimental or disgusting in some cases. So there's that. The other con that I wanted to make sure we highlighted was there's the aspect of like not because of oversaturation. There's a lot of problems that come with oversaturation, but one of the big ones is like it's kind of like podcasts now, right? If you were one of the people on the ground floor back in 2005, like you might have been able to get attention, but it's so oversaturated now that like even the good ones, even the ones that are like pouring their heart and soul and making a good product, they have to put so much effort now into like getting their name and their game out there. Like you have to do social media campaigns, you have to cozy up to journalists and stuff like that to try to get attention on your game. And not, again, these are the guys that are like, the skill set that it takes to like create a good game and the skill set that it takes to market a good game don't often overlap in people. Right. You know what I mean? So like these poor guys who are like a team of like 3 or 4 dudes who are like passionate and making this game in their basement, they're not necessarily all going to have the skills to do all of that, schmoozing, and therefore get women. Yes, I'm sorry, you're right. or non-binary folk.
There you go.
They're not going to have the abilities necessarily always have the same overlap of skills, and therefore a lot of really good products can get lost in the shuffle. So it's definitely got its controversies, I think.
Yeah, and we see like unique ways of curation kind of happening under the table. Not under the table because it's obvious to us, but if you go like the whole Amazon Prime, Twitch package together, you can see all these perks that you get for free, and there's so many things that would draw your attention to indie titles. And then we saw Fall Guys partner with Sony to come out as a PlayStation Plus game for free for everyone. And Rocket League did the same thing, and they found success that way. And so it was like, this is a really good game. It's obviously high quality, higher than some of the trash we're talking about. And so we see unique partnerships happening. Microsoft's doing the same thing with like Game Pass. They get promoted to the top. It's like, here it is, it's free, and you can play it today on launch day, etc. Like, and we just saw that a game came out this week called 12 Minutes, and it's a 12-minute cycle about a murder mystery where a dude comes home from work and his wife may have murdered someone or him, and it's crazy. It sounds fun. I can't wait to play it. It's free. It's on Game Pass. It's games like that and like partnerships. Like Celeste was highly featured on Nintendo Switch's storefront for a while. So that's kind of how the industry is now focusing on what is actually good in the independent. This isn't really a pro or a con. It's just a result of the cons you've highlighted, where we're seeing, if you've got eyes on an independent title, think about how you got there. Like Cuphead was promoted heavily by Microsoft to be an exclusive to Xbox for a while, and they showcased that in like an E3 presentation or something like it.
I guess
right?
that's what I mean, though, just sort of to piggyback into that, like the point is, like, you have to get the attention and you have to get the support, basically, of some
big wigs.
Someone is, again, which brings us back to the same problem, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, like, the idea, the sort of the idyllic dream, right, of the independent game movement is like, you have the creative freedom to actually make good stuff, right? Quote unquote, actually make good stuff. And then, supposedly by the law of, supply and demand and the free market, like, the bad stuff will get filtered out because people will be like, this is bad, I don't want to play it. And the good stuff will rise to the top. But that's not reality, right? Like, reality is like, no, there's a political component too, and you have to have people on your team that are able to maneuver that and get the attention on your game, because attention is the biggest currency right now, right? Mm-hmm. But it is cool. I mean, I didn't want to just talk about cons necessarily. It's a question. I think some of the pros that we haven't highlighted yet is we did talk about how it's like, it's an experimental ground. It's a place for games to kind of go forward with new ideas because they're not saddled by, again, what has to sell well. In fact, an example of this is Minecraft. Was an independent game, y'all. Like, we can't talk about indie games without talking about Minecraft. The single best-selling video game of all time was an independent game to start with. So, again, that brought the game industry forward, right? Like, Minecraft was hugely influential on the types of games that we see now because they were able to experiment and try something different by being an independent studio. The other aspect is sort of in the other direction, right? Instead of bringing games forward, there's also this idea of, like, it allows developers to preserve certain game development styles that may have fallen out of favor due to popularity. So things like, the independent movement saw the resurgence of things like 2D side scrollers, which we hadn't seen 2D side scrollers in forever by 2005, right? They had basically disappeared from the AAA space because of the 3D. 3D game development was a thing now. So you could create 3D worlds. And so people were like, cool, 2D is a thing of the past, but there's still a fondness and nostalgia associated with 2D side scrollers. And now there's a whole bunch of indie games that sort of preserve that style. I think of like Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, right? Like it was I don't know if it was indie or not necessarily, but it was an attempt to kind of recreate Castlevania Symphony of the Night because that style had fallen out of favor, but only to kind of rediscover its favor through the independent movement. So there's sort of a preservation aspect that the indie game movement is capable of maintaining, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Awesome.
I like it. You can do any style you want. As an indie game. I love all the different styles that are out there.
Yeah, for sure. All right, cool. So let's highlight, what do you think are some of the best indie games, and what are some games that are the bottom? What?
You're moving too fast. Remember, do you like indie games?
Yeah. Do you like indie games?
That discussion.
Yeah, so, good point.
Yeah, through the whole Xbox Live Arcade and the whole Steam, the bubble of indie games got crazy, and I did not like them at all. I was like, get them out of here. I don't care. I want Final Fantasy. I want Grand Theft Auto. I want Mario. I want Gears of War. I want Halo. All of these indie games are getting so much attention. I would watch these big announcements for like E3 or like Gamescom or GDC, and it would all just be like, there's so many indie games. They're just flooding my face with a bunch of crap that I don't care about, and I would never really give them a time of day. And then I'd start hearing people talk about playing them at like work and among family, and like, what are you guys playing? Oh, I'm playing this Hotline Miami, or I'm playing Minecraft, and I'm like, get this. Like, I want to talk about like real games. Like, that's what I used to think of, like that real games.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But then it actually took me through about 2013, which was close to the whole indiepocalypse, where I started to appreciate them. And it was due to the PlayStation Plus like free offerings on PlayStation 4. Some of the early indie games that I have fond memories of. One of the first ones is Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. I absolutely adore that game. I was like, oh, there's actually something to some of these indie games. You know, I just did What Do You Learn and highlighted Severed and Tacoma, and I played Valhalla, which is a cyberpunk bartending game. And the list goes on. Like a game called Actual Sunlight is on my trophy list, and there's more and more and more. I love them now. Certain ones, right? I love the artistic freedom. I love the experiences and the stories they can tell. I've played Gone Home. I loved it too. So do I like them now? Yes. I'm still very picky.
Yeah.
I don't just like grab the next one and think, oh, it's going to be fun. I also despise how difficult some of them are. Like, I know Celeste has a lot of accessibility options, but the barrier of entry for me was that Celeste was super hard, but it looked awesome. It's like this 8-bit side scroller. The Messenger, which is kind of like Ninja Gaiden, it switches from 8-bit to 16-bit. Sounds amazing. Moonlighter, that's another one I want to play. So the list goes on. I've played What's Remained of Edith Finch. Overcooked, I think, began as an indie title, and I liked it. So there's so many now
that
we
played
I'll
Enter
actually...
the Gungeon together.
Yeah, and we played Enter the Gungeon. I platinumed A Way Out, even.
Yeah.
So it depends now. I now... Firewatch, awesome. Go play that. Yeah, so I pay attention to them now, and I look at them as I would any other game where I want to see some of the reviews and like some of the reception, and maybe if I do see an indie game in an announcement reel or at a big gaming event, it'll now pique my interest, like 12 Minutes at the Xbox conferences that they've had over the past year when they announced the game back in 2019. I was like, oh, that looks really cool. It's coming to Game Pass. I'm going to play that. So some of the barriers of entry have gotten lower. The quality has gotten better. The exposure and the curation, at least to bubble up into my world, has gotten better. And so, not that I'm like this high and mighty, I judge games and I only play the best. That's silly because I don't.
No,
just
you
play
play
the
what
best,
interests you.
Exactly.
Exactly. And so,
yeah.
Good games will interest you, whether they're AAA or indie.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's exactly where I am at too. Is like I like playing good games or games that I guess are good to me, to my tastes.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, I'm kind of with you, except from a slightly different approach, slightly different tweak, which is just that most indie games that I saw were things that didn't interest me. That I wouldn't ever say they were necessarily bad games, but I would say they just didn't seem to interest me. They were of either genres or styles that didn't really appeal to my tastes.
Mm.
But as I've seen in the last 5 or so years, especially since we started doing the podcast, my tastes have started to evolve over the years, and I'm open to more and more indie games as I begin to be exposed to different genres and different styles than I had previously been exposed to before. And so I've definitely similarly also began to dip my toe more into that. I mean, again, indie game that I absolutely loved and definitely want to try more of. Supergiant, what are they called? It doesn't matter. Hades, amazing, and loved it. So yeah, I definitely have.
Supergiant made Hades.
Supergiant, okay, I knew it was either Supergiant or there's also Supermassive in there. But anyways, yeah. So that is a.
Yes, there is a Supermassive,
and they're different.
Yes, they are different. They did the Dark Pictures anthology,
gotcha,
and Until Dawn.
Wonderful. So yeah, that's so Supergiant's, Hades makes me want to go back and play Bastion and Transistor, which are some of their other games. So yeah, I definitely have more, and I played a little bit of it, haven't gotten super far, but after playing Souls-likes and getting into that genre, I had heard great things about Hollow Knight as sort of a 2D version of Dark Souls.
Yep. And
found it very charming and very fun and very quality experience, despite it being a 2D side scroller, which isn't quite my thing these days. But nevertheless, I'm finding myself more interested in dipping my toe into some of these indie games just because they are good, because they're quality, and also my tastes are expanding personally. So yeah, cool. All right. Well, I know we are running out of time, but we've hit on a lot of, I think, indie games I think we probably would both consider some of the best. Obviously we had to mention Minecraft, so it's there.
Yep.
That's been done. There are other really popular ones. I can go over the ones I just see here in a list of, kind of favorite ones. Binding of Isaac, Braid, we had talked about recently in our best video games of all time list. Super Hot, Rogue Legacy. There's a lot. Yes, Spelunky.
Fez.
Don't Starve. Did we talk about Don't Starve? Stanley
No, not yet.
Parable.
Yep, Stanley Parable. Yeah.
Talos Principle I hear a lot of. And
Outer Wilds is
trying
kind
to
of
hit-
recent and hitting
Oh,
some.
yeah,
Yeah.
mhm,
Super
yeah.
Meat Boy. I mentioned them.
Undertale, we have to talk about
Yep,
Rocket
Undertale.
League too. Both those incredibly. Stardew Valley, huge games. Darkest Dungeon is, I don't know if it's super popular, but it's one that like my
Yep.
buddy Justin tried to get me to play a lot, and I do still want to circle back around to it. I think it might be. I'm not entirely sure on this, so don't quote me, but I think it might be like a turn-based combat RPG with rogue-like elements in it, which
don't know.
is super intriguing.
Yep.
Dead Cells almost won.
Disco
awards.
Elysium.
Yeah, Disco Elysium. Yep,
Firewatch.
Subnautica. Mm-hmm.
Subnautica.
Amnesia was kind of during that like big horror phase. I think Slender Man's probably on there as well. The Slender Pages or whatever, 8 pages.
Faster Than Light.
Return to Obra Dinn. Among Us. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Among Us. Yeah, that's a huge one too.
Yeah,
Bloodstained
exactly.
Vigil of the Night. You have that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So cool. So those are some of the ones. Again, we're just kind of listing them off. We're not digging deep into them, but like those are, we're just trying to just give exposure to being like, oh yeah, because sometimes you run across a game and you're like, I didn't even know that was an indie game.
Yeah.
So that happens to me all the time. So
let's look at best indie games for 2021, just like the most recent ones that came out this year so far.
mhm.
Let's look at that. I think. Oh wow. Okay. Fall Guys was 2021. That's weird.
Oh, weird. Yeah,
No,
I guess
that's
it
last year.
was last year. Okay. Well, yeah, because Among Us and Fall Guys came out both last year during the pandemic, and were both super popular.
All right. So some of the stuff hasn't come out yet, but there's a game called Lake coming out September 1st. Dustborn to be determined. Moonglow Bay also to be determined. Toem, Where the Heart Leads came out over the summer. The Sheba Story, Bear and Breakfast. Kina, Bridge of Spirits is coming in August. You know about that?
indie, yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yep. A game
Oh,
called
and then
Sable.
there's Abandoned, which is maybe Silent Hills.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole thing. I could do a whole topic on that.
we should do that. We should do an episode on
A
that.
deep dive on that whole conspiracy.
Totally. Yes. Let's go down the rabbit hole together. I want to go
Yeah.
down the rabbit hole. on
I don't
that
even
one.
know. I'm so ignorant. I need to do a lot of
There's
research.
so
on that
many
one.
things, dude. There's so many
Yeah.
things.
Another PS5 exclusive that was shown off was the cat that was navigating the cyberpunk city called Stray. That
Okay.
game looks really, really cool. I know there's so many more that have already come out this year. Again, 12 minutes.
Untitled Goose Game. Sorry, it hasn't come
Yep.
out this year, but Untitled Goose Game is another good one.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, then I think we're close to the end here. I had a question here. What do you think is the bottom of the barrel? But we kind of hit on some of those when we
yikes.
talked about those, like the ones where it's like, yeah, we're simulating. Though, wasn't there a game where they simulated rape that also got removed
That
from
does-
Steam?
yep.
Yeah, so awful. Why do people have to be the worst, Termite? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think? Real quick, sort of a last question. If you can do it in like 5 minutes,
Yeah.
do an answer in 5 minutes. If we can both to collectively do an answer in 5 minutes, what do you think your predictions are about the indie game movement? And do you think how kind of seeing how it has changed with more involvement from AAA developers already compared to when it began? What do you think its change is going to look like in the next decade? How do you think it's going to change?
It will continue to evolve. I think it's going to be a little small iterative improvement on where we're at now. I do look at games like Disco Elysium getting console ports, like Overcooked getting 4K remasters, games like Outer Wilds. All those things are now coming to AAA platforms. And so it's not just PCs, because PCs you can play on your laptop, you play it on a PC. It's not just cell phones, you can play it everywhere, where it's like the masses. These games are getting optimized for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, like the premium console experiences. Same with like Hellblade's Senua's Sacrifice. That was independent. Ninja Theory did that on their own. And then now they're acquired by Microsoft. So I think there's going to be a lot of independent studios that are going to be acquired by much bigger entities and funded properly to come up with new ideas and new fun things because they sell. Because like the success of the indie market, look at Minecraft. Look at Fortnite's probably not super indie because of Epic, but Epic's not really considered that's a huge publisher. But look at the successes of what's out there now, and look how indie games have gotten a hold of folks and how much real estate they get during the live reels, during the gameplay, and in the communications. Look at Twitch. Like Twitch streaming alone has completely changed the exposure, because if a popular Twitch player connects with an indie game, now that audience is connected to that indie game, and that's just going to provide success for it. So games like Stardew Valley getting an audience, that's going to be this small kind of iterative change to where the way indie studios get funded will be different. I think money is just going to be a little bit more loose. Like stuff's just going to be handed out. Like Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo are all going to start taking bigger risks. Activision, EA, Ubisoft, they're going to start taking risks. They all almost have, I don't know if Ubisoft has their own indie branch yet, but EA has theirs, and Activision doesn't have one yet either. So you start getting down into those like platform agnostic publishers, and like Steam is one of the, obviously PC. And then you have the handheld thing, like the Nintendo Switch and the Steam Deck. Like those things could also provide a platform for indie games to shine. And so stuff's just going to happen. VR and what's happening in the VR space is revolutionary. So like indie games aren't going anywhere. They're only getting better. They're being funded in different ways. And I think the quality is going to go up. And I think the exposure and the curation is going to be a little... I'm optimistic about the future of indie titles. I think the trash is going to hit the bottom and the good stuff will curate to the top as the good stuff makes more money. So capitalism. Happens.
I think that we're going to begin to... My biggest prediction is kind of something we've already talked about on the podcast before, but, kind of formally here in the indie episode. I think we're going to begin to see more of a solidification of sort of the categories, right? Like, because right now, again, it started off as something pretty straightforward. Indie games, small team, low budget, creative freedom. But it's blown up into something so big that it's going to need to begin to sort of kind of solidify into different categories. And I think that we've talked before about the sort of quote unquote AA games, where they are smaller, more experimental titles from smaller teams with lower budgets, but they are still kind of funded and associated with kind of bigger publishers. I think that's going to become more standard terminology in the discourse to start with, and then eventually sort of a kind of official official or unofficial category of games. I think I would like to see that kind of happen more over the next decade. I think it will, but I agree that I think that we're going to, it's not going anywhere. The bubble's not going to burst. It's going to maybe change, but it's not going to burst. Mm-hmm. So
a significant shift in the trend also that we didn't talk about during this entire episode. I'm not going to harp on it too much here because we don't have time. Yeah. But the fact that people back in the 80s and 90s were businessmen funding games that were not gamers themselves, and now gamers themselves have aged into those spots. And I think that trend continues. The generation of people who are just business suits that don't play games but fund them are going to die off. And I'm not trying to be like morbid. I mean, it's sad, right? We don't like death, but just the trends in generations. When Gen Z is the CEOs of video game industry companies, like Gen Zers who experience the Wii as their childhood console, we don't know what that looks like, right? We know there's a lot of indie games that these younger folks are playing, like Minecraft and Roblox are kind of the thing kids play these days. Same with Fortnite. They didn't exist when we were kids. They definitely didn't exist when our parents were kids. And so like it's a generational shift. And I think all of the landscape and the artistic vision and how things get funded and what's going on and the movements in the industry are going to shift as the consumers grow into retiring. So that's all going to change, I think, as well, and provide better opportunities and more exposure for better indie titles.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah.
Well, that is the show then for the week about indie games. If we left something out, if we left a game out, or if we left something out in history or whatever, we want to hear about that. So please let us know. If you have thoughts yourself on the indie game movement, we want to hear about that. In general, just respond to us. Give us some feedback into ways that we can kind of improve the content or how we approach talking about it. But specifically as it relates to indie games, that's what we're most interested in hearing about from this week. So, Termite, as a reminder, where can they share their thoughts if they have them?
Once again, the Cliff Notes version, go to 80bitpodsmash.com. That's our landing website with links to all of our social media outlets and podcast platforms. We are all over the internet, and all of the information about where you can find us are there. We have a Discord server. We have a Twitch channel. Check us out. We go live every Monday and Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern. Keep an eye on our social media channels for our sudden changes in schedules, given that you have a new baby and I've been on work travels forever and more around the corner. So, yep, hit us up.
Awesome. All right. So next week, unless you want to change it and talk about Abandoned, we're gonna talk on August 30th. We'll release an episode about the rise and fall of the loot box. So we had
Ooh.
talked about doing this episode a while ago. I don't remember which episode it was specifically, but we had talked about how we wanted to do kind of a deep dive on kind of this loot box trend.
Yeah,
that
we haven't
happened.
talked about it in a while.
Yeah, so
Last time we talked about it was when Shadows of War came out, sequel to
it
Mortal.
kind of like came and went, and so we want to kind of talk about it now in hindsight and talk about how it kind of what succeeded and what failed, why it failed. So we'll talk about that next week.
So without further ado, we will see you next week.